You know, the last lines to that hymn, singing about our own country, God, mend her every flaw. And you can't help today looking around the country realizing that we have our flaws. We still believe we're the greatest country in the world and the greatest place in the world to live, but we are certainly not without our flaws, and they are becoming frightening. I saw in the paper yesterday where a woman in Houston was murdered in her apartment, and then this morning's paper showed that 2 teenagers had been picked up for murdering her in order to have her car to drive to see a friend. It's scary. God mend her every flaw. And living in a time when it seems that we have no feelings anymore, that a person can take another person's life and not bat an eye, and we don't feel anything. Surely the prayer needs to be, God, mend our every flaw. But maybe in this kind of situation where we find ourselves, maybe we ought to go back and remember something that Jesus said. Not one sparrow falls to the ground apart from your Heavenly Father. That's a good feeling. In a place that is so flawed, to know that God still cares. A Methodist bishop went to a city in Michigan just to visit a church where a man had been pastor for many years that was sort of his idol, somebody he wanted to pattern his life after. The man was dead, but while he was there, he met his daughter and got to talking to his daughter, and she told the bishop about her father having had a heart attack and laying in the hospital thinking about being able to go back to his pulpit and to preach again, and she said, though he never did, he died of that heart attack. But she said, in the hospital, he worked on sermons. And she said one of that he worked on and talked to her about, she wrote some notes, and the title was, Oh, What a Heavenly Father We Have. And in that sermon, he pictured a little sparrow on the limb of a tree. And it was cold and it was raining, and the sparrow was ruffled and dirty and hungry and cold. And the sparrow's nest had been blown from the tree by the wind and the rain. And it seemed that nobody cared. And he said, there was that little sparrow, tiniest of all birds, sitting under the sheltering leaves of that tree. But he became so cold and so hungry and so tired that he gave up and fell from the tree and died. And nobody saw. And nobody cared. But God, in his heavens, looking down, said, I think I'll go to that sparrow's funeral. Because not one single sparrow falls to the ground that your Heavenly Father doesn't know it. You know, we who are preachers played preacher a long time before we got to be one. There's no telling how many birds I buried, you know, as a kid, or goldfishes or whatever, you know, playing. But now when you really think back and remember whether it was a sparrow, if a sparrow, then anything else, nothing falls to the ground that God doesn't know about and doesn't care. There was a story that probably is not based in fact, but it may be, of Jesus walking along with Joseph in the marketplace on their way home from the carpenter shop to eat lunch. And as they walked through the marketplace, on one of the tables was a pile of little sparrows for sale. Their feathers were ruffled and they were dead. And Jesus said to Joseph, why the sparrows? What are they for sale for? And Joseph said, you know, there are a lot of poor people who can't afford anything but a sparrow. We're lucky. But they can get 2 sparrows for a penny, 5 sparrows for 2 pennies. because they throw in an extra one. But he said, son, let me remind you of something, that not even one of those sparrows falls that God doesn't know about it. And maybe that's why years later Jesus said, not one sparrow falls to the ground that God doesn't know. It's good to know that somebody cares. And it's a good reminder that you and I pattern our lives and our caring after that. How does God care? What does he do? He enables you. He enables you to fight the fight and live your lives. 150 years ago, in a lab in England, a scientist happened to be sitting and he had a cocoon in the corner of his desk. And he noticed that the cocoon was breaking open. And he watched an emperor butterfly try to come out of that cocoon. And it struggled and fought so hard to get out of that cocoon. He said, I wonder what will happen if I help him. And he picked up a scalpel and he just slit the cocoon so the butterfly could get out. And the butterfly got out, moved to the corner of his desk, stretched its wings, stood there a moment, drooped, and died. And then he realized something. It was through the struggle that he found life. It was in the battle and the struggle that God enabled the butterfly to have life. It is through the struggles that God enables you to have life and to be able to live it to the fullest. Only in the struggles does he enable you. He empowers you. I don't know how, and that's not important. I don't know how we find the power to live our lives when things get really tough and the whole world shakes around us and the floors fall out from under us, and we manage to face it and to live it, and we find a power